I have many fond memories of my Bubby, and we'll dedicate the Shiur in her memory this evening. And let's learn a little bit about some of the heroic Jewish women of Chanuka. Some of us know a little bit about this topic already, and we heard a story, some lore. We won't cover all the stories necessarily, but I want to feature and speak about one of the most prominent ones tonight. So if you turn your attention to the screen, we'll learn a little bit about it. I'll just ask everyone to please mute yourselves on your phone for the time being, so that we don't have too much distortion on the line. And if you want to write something in the chat to get my attention, that's good. Or raise a hand, also good. Again, the Shiur is dedicated to Nishmat Saba Timurati Chava Bracha Bat Ben Sion Halevi Zichronah Livracha. The Rambam Maimonides gives us the story of Chanuka and tells us the basic contours of what happened. We know the story very, very well. The Baichenik Shemalchi Yavan Gazuk Zerot al Israel Ubatlu Datam. In the Second Temple period, the Greek kings decreed various decrees upon the Jewish people in order to nullify their religion. They didn't permit the Jewish people to engage in Torah and mitzvot. And then the Rambam puts in, and this is in his legal codex in the Mishnah Torah, Upashtu Yadam, b'mamonam uvivnotehem. They stretched out their hands against Jewish resources and against Jewish women, the daughters of the Jewish people. Then also, v'nichnesu laheichal, they entered into the sanctuary. Upirtza bo pirtzot v'timu hataharot. They created many breaches in the sanctuary, and they defiled that which was pure. This was very challenging for the Jewish people, obviously suffering terribly. B'tzalahem liYisrael me'od mipneihem v'lachatzum lachatz gadol. It was great pressure that they were under. Ad shirichem aleihem Elokei avotenu v'oshiem miyadam v'hitzilam. Until God, the God of our forefathers, saved them from their hands. They were rescued. V'gavru beit chashmonai kohanim hagedolim v'hargum v'hoshiu Yisrael miyadam. Until the Beit Chashmonai came, the house of the Hasmoneans, these Kohanim, Gedolim, doesn't mean they were all high priests, it means they were great Kohanim. They came and they killed the enemies. They saved the Jewish people from the hands of the enemy. They put up a king, they appointed a king among the various priests. And Jewish sovereignty returned for 200 years. Now, the Rambam is writing a legal codex. He's not writing a work of history. But the Rambam knows, as all of us know, the Tanakh does not include a book about Chanuka. And the sources that we have within our tradition are rather scarce. Consider the analog is the book of Esther. Megillat Esther, which happens in the Second Temple period, thereabouts, is a book of Tanakh. We have it as part of our canon. It's one of the 24 books of the Bible. When it comes to this story, what happened on Chanuka, we don't have an official book. And there is an important question to be asked fairly. Why don't we have a book? We do know, and I'll be quoting a little bit later tonight, that there is a book that in the Christian tradition, they consider to be part of what they call the Old Testament. But as I'd like to remind my friends and family, the Old Testament is not coterminous to the Torah, for so many reasons, beginning with the language and the fealty that we have to Hebrew. Of course, the name Old Testament, to us, it is not old. It is the Testament. It is the Bible. But in the Christian rendering, they have Old Testament and what they call New Testament. So we know about that split. But if one was to look in their canon, in some of the churches, by the way, I think the Protestants do not have this, but I believe the Catholics do, and various other sects do have books of Maccabees. Now, you can buy a book of Maccabees, not as part of Old Testament, but just as a standalone. It's part of a genre, a type of book called the Apocrypha. And the Apocrypha basically means, in Hebrew, it's called, these are the books that didn't make it into the canon. They're also known as, in Hebrew, the Sfarim HaChitzonim, the external works. Now, it's important to know this distinction, because while we will mine perhaps some of the external works, such as the Sfarim Chitzonim, aka also known as the Apocrypha, for the historical import at times, We have to realize that it did not ever receive the approbation, approval, gushpanka, as you could say in Hebrew, of the sages of Israel. They were aware of these books. They deliberately said they don't have a place in our canon, in our biblical canon. Number one, because we don't believe that they're written al pi ruach hakodesh with divine inspiration. All the books in our canon, our Tanakh, Torah, obviously, but also Nevi'im, prophets, but even the scriptures, the Ketuvim, which includes books that many of us are familiar with, like the book of Tehillim, like the book of Proverbs, like the book of Job, Eov, like the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, Divrei Hayamim, Daniel. These are all books that are part of a section of the Bible known as the Ketuvim. That's also written with Ruach HaKodesh. These other books are written in a style, but they're not actually, as far as our faith tradition is concerned, they don't carry religious significance in the sense of being divinely inspired. And their authorship is not necessarily one that was free of agenda, let's say, which is not a reason not to read it necessarily, but to be careful about what information we're willing to take from it and how authoritative we consider it. I'll tell you, full disclosure, I have my New Oxford Annotated Apocrypha, and I don't study it regularly anymore, but there was a time, 1996 is the date in it, where I tried to read through most of the Apocrypha, books like Wisdom of Solomon and the book of Tobit and the books of Maccabees, alongside the book of Susanna, the Prayer of Azariah, the Wisdom of Ben Sira. Now, what's interesting is that some of these books do get quoted sometimes by Chazal. The work of Ben Sira is quoted not many times, but a couple of times in Shas. And the Ramban, who I'll be coming back to a little bit later tonight, actually quotes from the book of Maccabees in Parshat Vayechi. Now, it's important to understand this for what we're going to be studying tonight, because one of the books in the Apocrypha, which many of us are familiar with, because we've heard something about a story about this person, is a book that is called the Book of Judith. In Hebrew, her name was Yehudit. But somehow, we don't have an authoritative source in the canon of the written text of the Tanakh about what happened with her. What I want to explore tonight is the fact that this story, though it is in the Apocrypha, is a story that became part of the halachic system. It's not a story that I would say a halacha emerged from per se, but minhagim, traditions, and fairly strong traditions at that, emerged from them. Let's explore a little bit. So the first things first, already as early as the Gemara, obviously, tells us that women are obligated in the mitzvah of lighting the Chanukah candles. We'll have to explain how it is, and various comments to try to explain. So if a woman's married, maybe she doesn't have to light, her husband lights for her. The Mishnah Berurah writes, Ishto kigufo, a woman and her husband are like one, and therefore, if he's out of town, she could light for him. If the two of them are together, he'll light and represent her, etc. We'll have to explain what happens with single girls. And Moiv Rabbi Rav Aaron Lichtenstein Zatzal believes that single girls certainly should be lighting, and he actually thinks even married women should be lighting. And Rav Lichtenstein wrote this and spoke this, that his wife lit, that Rav Soloveitchik's daughters lit, and his wife lit as well. So, okay, there are different traditions about this, but what's beyond dispute is that the Talmud, in the section known as Masachet Shabbat, talking about Chanuka, in that section, it mentions the statement of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, the Amr Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Nashim Chayavot B'ner Chanuka. I hope everyone can see the cursor that's pointing. Is everyone able to see that? I hope so. Someone can chat me if you're not. I'll see if I can fix that, but I hope you can see it. The Amr Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Nashim Chayavot B'ner Chanuka, She'af Hein Hayu Ba'oto Hanes, because women were also part of the miracle. And therefore, women are obligated to light the Chanukah candles. That's the statement of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. It is a normative statement. In fact, before that is Isha Vadai Madlika. For sure, a woman should be lighting the candles. As Rabbi Shua ben Levi teaches, Nashim Chayavet B'ner Chanukah Sh'afein Hayu Ba'oto Hanes. Okay. Rashi, on these words, explains to us the beginnings of some kind of a story that we may not have been familiar with, but it's something that the Rambam also alluded to. And that is right here. Rashi writes to us, Rashi, passed away in 1105, born 1040, died 1105, already is talking about this story. They were part of the miracle. And what is that? The Greeks made a decree. The decree was that all of the young maidens who got married, they would have to first spend the night with one of the Greek generals, basically. And there was a miracle that a woman did, and therefore women are part of the miracle, are part of the miracle of Chanuka, and therefore women like Hanukkah. He doesn't tell you more here. That's all we get. But already Rashi is giving us a hint. There's some kind of a story here that we may not be familiar with. Again, Rambam mentions in his normative work, when I tell you the story, the history of Chanuka, he includes this piece. And then Rashi here also, again, Rambam lived a little bit after Rashi, but Rashi is also mentioning this even earlier. And that seems to be the motivation for why women are at least obligated to light the Hanukkah candles. Again, I reiterate, according to many people who are probably on this call, if there's zocha to be married and one is zocha to have a spouse at home, so generally the husband lights, the wife is yotzei with it as such. So I actually asked Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon, a great posek in Eretz Yisrael, if he thought it could go the other way. If he thought the man and the woman are at home together, the woman could light for the man, if it goes both ways, or if they could share the lighting. So he wrote me back. He said the woman of the house usually lights the Shabbat candles, the Hanukkah candles. The minhag is that the man would light it. Okay, so just something to think about. And again, but I still stand by what I said. Rav Lichtenstein and the Rav Soloveitchik, both the women in their household, all the women would light the candles. So that's Rashi. Let's go back here. Rashi's grandson picks this up as well. And this is the Gemara talking about the holiday of Pesach and why it is that women are obligated to drink the 4 cups. So why are they obligated to drink the 4 cups? So the answer very simply is, they're also in the miracle. You have to understand this principle a little bit better, but that's the basic gist. The Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, on the page of the Vilna Shas, tells us that in Masechet Sota, in another tractate of Shas, it teaches us that in the merit of righteous women who are in a given generation, in that given generation of the Exodus, Nigalu, Nigalu, the Jewish people were able to be redeemed. So true too with regard to Megillah. That's obvious because of Esther Hamalka. So Amar Hachi, right? Mishum da'ayidei Esther Hava. And so too, it's true with that as well. And then Rashbam just writes, v'chein gabe Chanukah. Also with regard to Chanukah. What about Chanukah? There's no Esther in Chanukah, so also Chanukah. Look up Masechet Shabbat, where it mentions that women were part of the miracle of Chanukah. We just saw that on the top of the page. Loshem Reinu Halevi. So one of the Rebbeim said this, and Rashbam says, I agree. Now, if we're looking for more of the story, we could look across the page. The Rashbam is part of a generation of scholars, the Bali Tosfot. So the Bali Tosfot picked up this idea as well, and he gives us maybe a little bit more. Hayu ba'oto hanes. They were in the same miracle. Pirish Rashbam. They have their copyists. Everything's handwritten, so their copyists are writing down what they have from the Rashbam, who was one of the Bali Tosfot. If you've ever heard of the famous sage of the Tosafist era, Rabbeinu Tam, he was a brother to this Rashbam, Rabbeinu Shmuel ben Meir, who was a brother to Rabbi Yaakov ben Meir. So they had nicknames. Rashbam is the acronym, and Rabbeinu Tam, Yaakov Ish Tam. So that the two. So here's Tosfot, the whole school. So they picked up the Rashbam, and they said, okay, the Rashbam wrote because on account of the women they were redeemed from Egypt. V'chein b'Megillah they Esther, and then Tosfot adds in Uvechanukah al Yedei Yehudit. It was because of someone whose name is, and there's her name, Yehudit. Now in the Rashbam on our page, right diagonally on the bottom left-hand corner, her name does not appear. But when Tosfot wrote it up over here, they mention that Rashbam, their version of the manuscript of Rashbam, has the name of Yehudit. This will be very significant in a moment when I come back to this book in a few minutes. Okay, so the Bali Tosfot asked, wait a second, it's a little bit strange. This is a bit challenging to claim that the reason why women are equally obligated in 3 mitzvot, on Pesach to drink the 4 cups, on Purim to hear the Megillah, on Chanuka to light the candles because they are instrumental in the miracle, that's challenging because the word to introduce this phrase was de'af. Af hein hayu ba'otanes. They were also. You see, that's actually the first line in the Talmud. Af hein hayu ba'otanes. They were also in the miracle. Also, mashma she'en and ikar. Sounds like they were a secondary role of some sort. Further, ve'od b'rishami garis. She'af hein hayu ba'oto. Safek mashma ba'otas sakana. So the Gemara there has another version, right? They were in the same suffix, means they were in the same, not miracle, but the same doubt. What does that mean? Mashma ba'otas sakana. They were in the same danger as the men. God forbid. In all 3 cases, there was a threat of annihilation. And the women were as subjugated as the men were, and as subjected to whatever the decrees might have been. Ergo, they're also part of the celebration. Tosfot disagrees a little bit with Rashbam. Here, the Bali Tosfot just point out, it doesn't exactly 100% jive, if you will. Now, the Tosfot adds into this, the Hadamrina de Pturot Misuka. Now, we say that women are, if we're going to say every time there was a miracle, so if it applied to the men and applied to the women equally, then the women and the men should be equal in the mitzvah. So the Bali Tosfot asks, what about sukkah? We know that women are actually, if they sit in a sukkah, they can fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah, but they're not obligated to sit in sukkah. They're 2 different things. They get a kiyum, a fulfillment of the mitzvah to sit in the sukkah, but they don't have a chiyuv, an obligation to sit in the sukkah. So if it's too freezing outside or whatever, the women don't have to sit in the sukkah. They can eat inside, but a man is not allowed to eat a meal inside. If it's cold, you go out in the sukkah. So the women are not obligated in the sukkah. Now, why not? Mitzvah Sheisha Zman Germa, it's a time-dependent mitzvah. So Tosfot would say, yeah, but wait a second, there was a miracle. Isn't the sukkah to remind us of clouds of glory in the desert? That's a miracle. The men and the women are equally given to that miracle. So the afagav, the afein hayabot nes, they were part of that mitzvah, of that miracle, rather, kibbutz sukkot shafti, that caused the Jewish people to dwell. So hatem ba'asid deoraita. That's because it's a biblical commandment, and a biblical commandment, we can't invoke this principle. The principle of, and they were also part of the miracle. Aval be'arba'a kosot rabbanan tiknu gam l'nashim keven shahayu ba'oto hanes. When it comes to rabbinic mitzvah, and here we find a little key. When it comes to the rabbinic mitzvah of drinking the 4 cups, that's not biblical. Eating matzah is biblical, but not the 4 cups. When we come to the mitzvah of women hearing the Megillah, that's not biblical. It's a book that was written well after the Torah was given. It's the book of Esther. So that's also rabbinic. And the third one, Chanuka, obviously in the rabbinic era. We don't even have a biblical book for it. So therefore, in those cases, once the sages made an enactment, they said it's true. All 3 of these are time dependent. There's a time limit. You can't drink the 4 cups 3 days later. And you can't hear the Megillah when it's not Purim, and you can't light the Chanukah candles in the month of Shvat. So these are all time dependent. No, they enacted it, and that's the koach, the power of the sages. They enacted for women as well because they were also part of the miracle when the miracle transpired. So here we have sort of a little bit of a deeper, hopefully already a broader understanding. There's something here, at least according to Rashbam. Tosfot do disagree, but according to Rashbam and Rashi that we saw earlier, and the Rambam, there's something here about the women being involved, not as secondary, but somehow very much crucially involved in the salvation that transpired. The Gemara Masechet Megillah, for want of time, won't go into it now, but again, it tells us here, we have the sentence on the top of the page from Rishub and Levi, same person, quoted in 3 different places in Shas. Nashim Chava Mikra Megillah, women are obligated in hearing the Megillah. They're also in the miracle. There's a question, is it to hear it, to read it? Not for tonight. Here, Tosfot entertained the exact same thing. Again, they quote the Rashbam, and they disagree with Rashbam. There's a little bit more here, but I'll leave it for now. But just to show you, there's yet another source in all the contexts. 4 cups, Chanuka, 4 cups, and Mikra Megillah Purim. All 3 of those have questions, and this expression, Sha'afin Hayuba Oto Hanes. Okay. I'm going to skip the Tzitz Eliezer. If you have time, we'll come back to it. Rav Eliezer Voldenberg. It's a little bit more on this Gemara, but I want to get to the next piece. The Kolbo, the Sefer Kolbo, was written by Rav Aaron Cohen of Narbonne. He was originally from France in 1306. Everybody knows about 1492, but very few people remember 1306. The Jewish people of France were expelled, everybody. So he had to run away to Spain. That time Spain was the haven. And he went to actually Mallorca, Spain, and lived out his life there. And he wrote from some important farm. He's around again in the early 14th century. And he writes a little bit more of the details about what is being alluded to about the women and a miracle. What is it? So he writes, Perush. Let me explain what it means. Hakol, anashim v'nashim v'taf. The enemies came to kill everybody, unfortunately, the men, the women, the children. V'yesh mefarshim, but some explain, she'al yedei isha ira lehem, denes gadol hahu. So if you look carefully now, there's two reasons. One, they were also in the miracle is code for they were also equally under threat. But some explain that it's because of a woman that there was a great miracle, a nes gadol. And what is her name? Ushma Yehudit. As is written in the text of the Agadah in some kind of a madrash somewhere, and it gives us the short story. Bat Haital Yochanan Kohen Gadol, the high priest Yochanan had a daughter. V'haita Yifat Torah me'od, she was very beautiful. V'amar Hamelach Yavan shtishkavimo, the king of Greece. Unfortunately, in the same way that Sarah Imenu at one time was kidnapped, Lo Aleinu by Paro, and Lo Aleinu by Avimelech. It happened twice to her. Same thing with Esther Hamalka and Achashverosh on a certain level as well. So the king of whether it's literally the king or it means it was some kind of governmental person is not clear, but the same thing. Okay. Ve'chilato, she fed him tavshil shagvina, she fed him cheese. Some kind of a cooked dish involving cheese. Kadeshi yitzma, so he'd become thirsty. The yishtel arov, it would get drunk. The yishtaker, he'd drink too much and he would get drunk. The yishkavi radem, and he would get sleepy, he would fall asleep. The yihila came, that's what happened. By yishkavi radem v'tikach charbo v'chadcha rosho v'tivyeuli rishalayim. She decapitated him with his own sword, and she took his head and brought it to Rishalayim. Uchirot hachayal achel kimet giburam veyanusu. When they saw that their mighty man had been killed, they ran away. Ve'alkein, therefore, nahagula sot tafshil shel gvina b'Chanuka. Tonight I was makpid with the latkes, applesauce very good, sour cream. So that's the gvina. That gvina means cheese. It's some kind of a dairy product. So there's a minhag to make cooked foods with cheese. Who knew? And that's the Kolbo mentioning this. The Ran, who was Rabbeinu Nissim of Gerona, lived a little bit later than the Kolbo, picks this up as well. He doesn't mention her name is Yehudit, but he does say that it's the same kind of idea, same story. Everybody escaped, and therefore they have a minhag. There's a minhag to eat cheese on Hanukkah. Cheese. Okay. The next source you're looking at here, this is the source from the Halacha, the Shulchan Aruch. And the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch, he is the Shulchan Aruch. It's the Mechaber and the Ramah. The Ramah second line here writes, Yesh omrim sheyesh lecho gvina b'Chanuka, lefi shehanes nase b'chalav she'achila Yehudit et ha'oyev. There's a minhag, one should eat, some say one should eat cheese on Hanukkah, because the miracle happened with milk, with dairy products that were fed by Yehudit to the enemy. And the quotation here is from the Kolbo and the Ran, the two aforementioned sources. Now, why is this that I have on the screen so incredibly significant? It's a halachic source. The others were also halachic, but you have different ideas, different thoughts. When you get to the Ramah, that's the clearinghouse. What the Ramah writes in the 16th century is determinative, and we live by his word. And this is what he writes, that one should on Hanukkah have dairy products in memory of the great miracle of Yehudit feeding that to the enemy. That's the description. I want to look at the story a little more in depth from an yet earlier source. I don't know how much earlier. The truth is a book called Genuzot, edited and put together by Rav Moshe Hershler. It's early Midrashim. How early is anybody's guess, but it's certainly from the Middle Ages. And it tells us the story in longhand, but I want to learn at least part of it together with you tonight in order to fill out some of the details and to appreciate a little bit better what transpired, what this was about. So it's a long book, Gnuzot. There's several volumes. It's available online, open source at HebrewBooks.org. I don't own the book, but you can find a lot of things online these days in huge PDF files. So I cycled through it. I found Yehudit. Oh, here we are, the Masa Yehudit. So we have the story here, and it starts telling you the story in longhand about Tanu Rabban. It's even written in the style also of something that you would find in the Talmud. In the days of the Greek Empire, the wicked Greek Empire, they had various decrees to destroy the Jewish people. They shouldn't learn Torah. So what do the Jewish people do? They learn Torah secretly. They made another decree and another decree. By the way, one of the decrees was whoever has an ox, they should write on its horns, have no share with the God of Israel. It's not, the whole thing's not listed here. There are other versions. Why did that matter? Because if you had that written on an ox, the thinking was the Jews will not eat meat anymore. It's a convenient way of banning shchita. If you slaughter this animal, you've sort of signed on to the declaration that you're not connected to the God of Israel. Yeah? So what did the Jews do? Everyone sold off their oxen, so they had no meat. So they get to another thing, right? So they kept going. They kept going. It describes what did they do? Another decree: no brit milah. Another decree: they closed all the mikvahs. They outlawed that women could go to mikvah. Then they went after brit milah and by canceling brit milah and canceling immersion. Then they had a whole thing about their houses on the doors. So each thing the Jewish people were trying to get around, yeah, a whole story. And in this mix, we learn va'od gazru shekol mi shenose isha sheolichena lemelech livol ota tchila v'char kach tachzor lebayla. It's a really shocking and horrific. We saw it in earlier sources as well. But here's a midrashic source, not just in the Rishonim, but in the Medrash itself, that describes, again, I don't know the exact dating of it, but it's part of the world of Midrash, and Medrash is a genre. So some are written earlier, some are later, but it mentions the same horrific decree that the women, and they're getting married, they have to take them first for the night to be with the king. There was a way of A, violating the women, which is horrific in terms of the subjugation factor, and B, presumption is that they would be breeding more Greeks in the most horrific way through assault, through rape, essentially. So this went on for 3 years and 3 months. So just gives you a flavor of what's going on. So I'm skipping down just for want of time. Hashem made a nace. Not one of the Jewish daughters, that's what it says, was actually defiled. They kept finding ways around it, secret weddings. Okay, but then their luck ran out, so to speak. Why? A very prominent woman, the daughter of the house of the Hasmoneans, she was going to get married. Her father was well known to the kingdom. There was no way she was going to be able to get married in secret and claim she was already married a long time. So the king sent, Antiochus presumably sent some kind of a governor to go after her. So her father and all the elders of the Jewish people are sitting together and they're eating. So when she found out that the king had sent someone to get her, here her Abadaita v'Amr, she said to herself, if I go to this uncircumcised one, he will defile me. V'tomru, and they'll all say, the Jewish girls, the daughters of Israel, will all say, are we better than the daughter of Chashmonai, meaning of the head of the Hasmoneans themselves? She said to herself, I'm not a regular person. I can't just go along with it. And by me, it's going to be okay? Never. Better I should die than there should be the desecration of God's name. Me'asta, what did she do? Masra atzma lahariga. She gave herself over to be killed. She took off her presumably fancy garb. She was a dignitary after all. She was an aristocracy. And she took off all her jewelry and she put on rags. She took a cup and a jug of wine in her hand. She started going around like a maidservant pouring for all of the people. She's the dignitary. She's the princess. She's feeding everybody. The Jewish people saw what she looked like. They were so embarrassed. They all started looking down at the ground. What are you doing? You're the daughter of the Kohen Gadol. How could you be dressed this way? It's terrible. Her mother and her father were ashamed in front of the people at the party or eating there. She started crying and wailing. She said to them, Hey, tzadikim b'nei tzadikim, chasidim b'nei chasidim. Hey, you righteous ones, you pious ones. You're all ashamed that I'm wearing rags? You're not embarrassed before the Holy One, blessed be He? You want to give me over to an Arel, to a non-Jew, that I should be defiled? Miyad, suddenly Yehuda and his brothers, started to counsel with each other. So what did they do? They brought myrtle branches and all sorts of fragrant trees and branches and spices, and they made canopies like chupot, from the house of the Hasmoneans until the house of that wicked one, wherever, Yerushalayim, presumably, from one place to the other. He saw the honor they were paying him. Amar Lanashav, he said to his people, Hallelujah Gadol Yisrael. These are the greats of the Jewish nation. Hallelujah Gadol Yisrael. They're so happy to fulfill my decree. We should really honor them. So he said the guards can all go away. Who was left in the room? Yehuda and his brethren and his friends, his fellows. Yehuda decapitated this, whoever he was, this Arel. Yeah. And they cast the head into the encampment of the Greeks. They chased them all the way north. Ikar Malchutam Alexandria Shel Mitzrayim. From north to south. All the way down to Alexandria of Egypt, and they killed many, many thousands of Greeks. That's what it describes. Everyone was very afraid that Yehuda and his people had done this. So Yatz the Barkim Bet Kodesh Kodashim, a heavenly voice emanated, a divine echo, and it said, Nitzchu Talia the Ozla Agcha Karva Ba'antubaya, which is an expression meaning the young mighty men have gone to engage and to be in a conflict with Antubaya, which is probably named for Antiochus. Baya is like this woeful one, something like that. Another version of this is footnotes here. He says maybe it's another word, Antiocha, but it's expression somewhere else. Okay, that's only part one of the story. Now we get to the part that has to do with Chanuka. That wasn't part of Chanuka. That was part of Chanuka. That's like chapter 1. But you see already this woman who does not have a name. She's just the daughter of the Kohen Gadol, of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Okay, so that's what it describes. And that somehow starts off some kind of element of the conflict. That's the Medrash. Second part, Kevin Shama Alifurnus, Melech Yevanim. We don't know who this person is. Is it some kind of a cognate of Antiochus? Is it some other derisive name? I don't know. I don't have expertise in Greek. I tried to do some research, didn't come up with much. So Alifurnus, definitely apparently a Greek name. The king of the Greeks, he started bringing all of his legions. He came to fight a war against Yerushalayim. They were very afraid. And now we learn there was a woman in Yerushalayim. She was very beautiful. What was her name? Yehudit. In English, Judith. And when she saw what was going on with the Jewish people, how they were being so careful with the Torah and the mitzvot, she gave herself over to heaven. What does that mean? Amra, she said, maybe there'll be a miracle. I will submit myself to this Gentile. So she got all dolled up, and she said to them, open me the doors. Presumably they were under siege. I will go out. I'm sure that Hashem will help me. There'll be some kind of salvation for the Jewish people. So they said to her, aren't you embarrassed from Hashem? Well, look what you're doing. Why are you going willingly? So maybe you're actually interested in him. Maybe you're interested in that uncircumcised one who is impure. That's your interest. She said to them, Amra lahem chas v'shalom, enani mitkavenet l'shum davara sheba'olam el l'shem shemayim. I'm doing it for the sake of heaven. They opened the gate. She ran outside. It describes she gets to the Greeks' camp, and she started to say out loud, may the king live, may the king live. They asked her, what are you doing here? She said, I have to talk to the king. Go tell him. They went to the king. They told him, there's a beautiful woman. She's outside. There's no one as beautiful as her. She wants to come inside. She wants to speak with you. He agrees. She goes in front of him. The king asks, what do you want? She says, my father and my brothers are Kohanim, and they're Nevi'im. And I heard that they're all saying in the siege, they say Yerushalayim will never fall, except it will fall in the hands of the king, whose name is Eliphornis, and you're that man. So I came to you so that you can give me some kind of a pact, meaning I'm going to betray them because I want you to know they have no will to fight you, but I want to be in with you. I'm turning sides. So he said there, if you want to marry me, so I'll give you Ad Chatzia Malchut. Sound familiar? This is the Chanuka story, not the Purim. So I'll give you up to half the kingdom. So she said, okay, how could I marry you? I can't even marry one of your servants. All the more so to the king. So she explained, I have to go to the mikveh now. It's that time of the month. I have to go to the mikveh. So I'm going to go tonight. So if you let me go, but I want you to do me one favor, she asked the king. I want you to make an announcement that anyone who sees two women, me and my maidservant, we didn't know the maidservant was with her till now, me and my maidservant, we're going to go down to the spring. No one should speak to us and do anything to us. Just let us pass. Immediately, this wicked one made this command happen, and they agreed. And he's so excited. He makes a big meal. He invites all of his people, and they eat and they drink and they all get drunk. And he gets drunk. He gets more drunk than anybody else. Does this sound like a familiar story? Well, this is the Chanuka edition of the same story. And it describes that he became very tired and he fell down. When everyone saw that he had fallen and actually had fallen asleep, we better abscond. We better get out of here while we can, because the king's going to wake up while he's sleeping, right? He's only doing this because of us, so that we'll actually get out of here, so that he can have his way with this young maiden. So everybody leaves, and the king is alone with this woman and with her maiden, or her maidservant. And when she sees that he is sleeping like someone who is dead, she takes down his sword and she severs his head, and they cover him with a sheet, and they take his head and she wraps it in a bag and puts it in the hand of her maidservant, and the two of them go down to the spring. And no one could speak to them because the king had said no one could bother them. So they went. All the way back from there to Yerushalayim. So she tells the people at the gate, let me in. And they said, no, aren't you embarrassed that you went? They're coming back. It's somehow triumphant. And she says, no, I'm telling you right now. I swear to you, right, that I have the king, the head of the king right here. Now, it's not literally the king, but the governor, whoever this is. So they showed the head to, if there was a fellow there, it's another story, who was there tied up, who was a Greek, and he said, that's the king. So they believed her. They let her in. Immediately they let her inside. And they sang praises to Hashem. When the morning light came, they got together, they went to shul, and they davened together. They said Shema Yisrael out loud, very, very loud. When the Greek legions heard this, they were shocked. They're probably massing to fight us. We thought they have no will to fight, but they are going to fight us. They ran to the king to tell him, again, not the king, but whoever this person is. They found they found the decapitated, the body basically under a sheet. At that hour, they lost their will to fight, and they didn't have any power left. And they turned around and they ran away. The Jewish people chased them. And right? So the source I'm reading from, that I just read from now, is from a book called Genuzot. It's a compilation of midrashim put together and annotated by the scholar of Moshe Hirschler, who lived in the 20th century in Eretz Yisrael, based on manuscripts that came from the Middle Ages. So this actually, it does not have a date on it. That's a problem, but it's certainly, these stories are the stories that Rashi is referencing, that the Rashbam is referencing, the Kolbo, the Ran, the Ramah. This is where it's from, right? It came from this compendium. When we read the story, of course, we hear a lot of echoes of other stories in Judaism. So here's the Otzer Midrashim by Eisenstein. That's already 1915. He published this based on manuscripts. No one's entirely sure how authoritative the manuscripts are that he used. So I submitted for your consideration. We'll have to read the whole story again. But what's interesting and different in this version of the story is I put it in blue here. He says, you should, when in the first story, where the woman is dressed in the rags and saying, how could you let me just go out? You're not going to fight for my honor. That was in the other story. In this version, she says to them, Halo yesh lachem lilmod mishimon v'levi achei Dina. Didn't you learn anything from the story of Shimon and Levi, the brothers of Dina? Shlo hayu el shnayim v'kanu lachotem v'hargu krach kishchem masun Hashem al yichud shel makom v'azram Hashem v'lo yichlimum v'atem chamisha achim Yehuda, Yochanan, Yonatan, Shimon, Elazar. You're 5 brothers. That's the Maccabees. I mean, Yehuda is the one called Maccabee, of course, but he's the most prominent. That's why they're all called Maccabees. The Maccabees, because he's like the most prominent of them all. Yehuda, a Maccabee. But they're all 5 brothers, the Bnei Matityo. We said in Al Nisim already tonight. B'mei Matityo b'Nochan Kohen Gadol, Chashmonai Uvanav, and his sons. These are the sons. So she said to them, how could you not have taken a page from Shimon and Levi? In fact, the Shimon and Levi story, it's interesting. I was doing a lunch and learn last week at Ida Crown. So we're learning Parshat Vayishlach. I pointed out to the boys and the girls in the group that they should recognize that the Torah describes that after that episode happened with Dinah, which on the face of it is highly controversial, obviously, for the violence. Yaakov thought it was controversial. He said, what did you do? You made me odious in the eyes of all the people. He ends up cursing Shimon and Levi's anger at the end of his life. Nonetheless, they get the last word in that story. Question mark, exclamation point. Is our sister going to become a harlot? Can that be? You thought we were going to sit quietly, right? So the next chapter, right after that, 2 verses later, Vayisal, they all traveled, the Jewish people, the Bnei Yaakov traveled, and the Chitat Elokim, the fear of God, was upon all of the cities which was in their area, and they did not chase after the Bnei Yaakov. They didn't want to chase after them. Retrospectively, the end of his life, Yaakov Avinu is reflecting on this, and he says that I got Shechem Achad Alach, I'm going to give you, Yosef, Shechem Achad Alachecha, I'm going to give you Shechem, and I'm going to give you Shechem, which I took with my sword and my bow and arrow. You look in Parshat Vayishlach, it doesn't mention there was a war, but Rashi right there tells us that when Shimon and Levi killed the people of Shechem, so all the people in the surrounding area and the environ got together, Lizdavig Lahem, to fight against them. And Yaakov himself got ready for war and fought a war. The Ramban quotes from also a book that is a mysterious book. It's not part of the Bible. It's not part of the Tanakh. Some think it's part of the world of Medrash. It's not clear which Medrash. What does it describe? He says there's, if we believe in the book, who Sefer HaYashar, some say it is the Sefer HaYashar, it's another book, whatever, a medieval work. If we believe in that book, there were 3 wars between the Jewish people and the people who lived in the surrounding towns of Shechem, right? Of course, at this point, I pointed out to the kids at this Lunch and Learn that it is a terrible story on so many levels. But you do realize that whatever violence happened, and not to excuse the violence, but it was a rescue mission, right? Like their sister was actually kidnapped and being held captive by this person who had already taken her and claimed that he was going to be married to her in perpetuity. And now he wanted to negotiate after the fact. So they were getting her back. Okay, but it describes, if not for their father, that actually himself girded for war with his weapons, and he fought, they would have been in great danger. That's what it describes. That this book tells the story in longhand. I've not seen this book. The Ramban had this book. He was happy and willing to quote, if we believe it, if it's correct, right? He wrote, if it's historically accurate. He didn't know, but the Ramban was willing to entertain this thing from an external book, has something to offer, okay? And then he quotes this idea about, as Rashi wrote, he quotes from Rashi, but why isn't it in the text of the Torah? You'll ask me, says the Ramban. So I'll tell you exactly why. Here are the important words. These are they. Everyone see it? It's across two lines. Ki haya nes nistar. It was a hidden miracle. The victory on the battlefield is a hidden miracle. And how did they fight? They fought. It looked like they were pretty strong, the Bnei Yaakov, the children of Yaakov. But it didn't go into details. And it's oftentimes that the Torah does not go into details about stories because it'll be too long of an excursus and because it won't even sound miraculous. But says the Ramban, believe you me, and it's a big thing for the Ramban, Nes Nistar. Chanuka, Milchama, Nes Nistar, war, hidden miracle, yeah? And that's what Chitat Elokim is here. Why was the fear of God struck into the hearts of the people of the area of Shechem? Because there were 3 wars there. It's something for consideration. And here, this version of the Medrash, again, not published in print till 1915 by an American scholar, I believe, Eisenstein. It doesn't happen until the manuscripts are written up. But we have these manuscripts that are being passed around, if you will, generation. I have no idea how old it is. This story should remind us of other earlier stories. So I gave you the reference to Shechem and Dinah and the sister with the brothers. But another story, we don't have time to read it inside, a story that happened in the area. This is the Yam Kinneret, of course, the Yam Kinneret up north, yeah. And we look at the Sea of Galilee, very beautiful. And this area here, this whole area here is the area where there was a war in the book of Judges, in the book of Shoftim. Now, why is that significant? The Jewish people fought against Sisra and his army, a whole long story. I don't have time to see the whole thing inside. But who are the heroes of the story? One is Tamar, right? Dvorah, excuse me. I said Tamar, I'm going to tell you in a minute, something else, right? Devorah, who sits under a tree called the Tomer Devorah, and she is leading the troops, it seems, together with Barak. And then in the middle of the story, we have the story of the death of Sisra, and the death of Sisra happens because he runs into a tent where there's a woman named Yael, and he goes in to hide. It's right here, and she takes him in, and he asks her for some water because he's thirsty, and she opens up her flask of milk, and she gives him milk, and she covers him with the blanket, and then, as is described, he falls asleep, and she takes a tent peg and impales him through the temple with it and kills him. So that's a parallel to the story, no? With Yehudit, there are parallels to the story of Esther. There are parallels to the story with Dinah. There are parallels to the story of what happens with Yael. And there's an element here in the story with Yehudit of drawing from those earlier stories. And that could be for 2 reasons. One, it's possible that it's because the story is a construct. And the Chachamim wanted to write a story to put in the Medrash, not in the Talmud, not in Midrashim that we usually have access to, but clearly Rishonim means the early sages, Rashi, Rashbam, Kolbo, Ran, etc. They're all using that material as authoritative to bring us to a tradition, either the mitzvah of lighting the Chanukah candles itself, or maybe the tradition of the eating of dairy, or the story actually is entirely historical. But what does everybody do when they're in a situation in Jewish history? They hark back to earlier stories. Esther Hamalka was talking about Sarah Imenu in the Midrashim in the Gemara Masechet Megillah. So this woman Yehudit is thinking about people who came before, such as Yael, such as Devorah. There's another excursus here with Tamar. I won't go into it now. So I said it, but I won't go down that road. But thinking about heroic Jewish women who came before. Yeah. And the idea that a story in each generation is an element of B'chol Dor Vador, not just Omdim Aleinu L'Chalotenu, but B'chol Dor Vador, Ma'asev Siman Labanim, seeing the story happening again and again. Rav Yaakov Meidan, I have 9 minutes left, so make them count. Rav Yaakov Meidan, the Rosh Yeshivat Har Etzion, said that he thought that if you look back in the book of Maccabees itself, which again, the Ramban quotes it in Sefer Bereshit and Parshat Vayechi, you'll find that there's something else that was incredibly heroic about women on Chanuka. Not a particular woman named Yehudit, but Yehudit, of course, the name Yehudit, sort of the name itself, she's the ultimate Jewish woman. She's Yehudit. She's a Jewess. That's in English, not really Judith or Judy. It's really Jewess, like Yehuda, Yehudit. Yeah. So it's not that she's the archetypal woman. That's the only story. He's not doubting that there's, the story, you have it in various sources, etc. But he said, if you look in the book of Maccabees, which is not authoritative from a religious perspective, you'll find something fascinating. I gave you the 2 excerpts here. No reason to read the book of Maccabees in Hebrew, because Hebrew, English, doesn't matter. It was written in Greek initially, and the expression. Okay. So the book of Maccabees, there are 4 books of Maccabees. I'll tell you the whole story about it, why there are 4 different ones. But suffice to say, basically books 1 and 2 are the ones that matter, that tell us the Hanukkah story in some way. Not entirely the case. But it mentions in the description, it tells you, if you want to sort of look at it inside, it describes the king wrote to his people, everyone should be one people, they should give up their particular customs, the Gentiles accepted the command of the king, many even from Israel gladly adopted his religion. Those are the Hellenized Jews. They sacrificed to idols, profaned the Sabbath. The king sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and towns of Judea, directing them to follow the customs. They could no longer give korbanot, no offerings. They couldn't go in the Beit HaMikdash. They couldn't keep Shabbos and Yom Tov. They had to be matame everything that was there. They put idols there. There was pig offered there, right? And to leave their sons uncircumcised, right? Make themselves abominable, unclean, profane, etc. Okay. And whoever doesn't obey will die. When you keep reading the story and about what transpired, it's in the 15th day of the month of Kislev, not in the year of the rescue, but years earlier. They put up a sacrilege, they altered the burning, they built altars in surrounding towns of Judea, they tore up Sifrei Torah, Lo Aleinu. Everyone had a Torah in their possession, was going to be killed. And as you keep reading, you learn this, verse 59. On the 25th day of the month of Kislev, before Hanukkah, not the year of Hanukkah, but 3 years earlier, there's a momentous day of tragedy. They offered sacrifice on the altar that was on top of the altar of burnt offering. According to the decree, they put to death the women who had their children circumcised, and their families and those who circumcised them. And they hung the infants from their mothers' necks. And when you consider this, you can see another version of this in 2 Maccabees. We have a little more of a graphic description about some kind of a monthly celebration of the king's birthday, that they'll walk in a festival for a pagan festival of some sort. And if you look here at verse 10, I'll let you read that for yourself. You can read the story of what happens here. Yeah. And we have a description about the terrible persecutions. Says Rav Meidan, you think the heroism was just that one story? The point was that Jewish women were making sure that their sons were going to have a Brit Milah. Now, halachically, there's a big discussion if women can serve as mohalot. The basic halacha is no, unless there is absolutely no other choice. Good example, what happens with Tzipporah, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Daf Chavav and Chav Zayin, debates Tzipporah, the mother of Moshe, seems to have circumcised him, circumcised the son, rather, Moshe's son. So did Moshe somehow help? Something like that. Moshe's not his mother, Moshe's wife, Tzipporah, that they circumcised his son, they're on the road, a whole story. But the idea that the women were willing to give up their lives if need be to make sure that Brit Milah was going to happen, we have from multiple versions of the story. in the book of Judith. This is the English version of the book of Judith from the New Oxford Annotated Apocrypha. You can buy it and you can read it. The story of Judith, as is told in the story of the Apocrypha, is very muddled. It's talking about things that chronologically seem to have almost nothing to do with Chanuka. It might have been around the time of Chanuka, maybe not. It's very, very murky. But the basic contours of a story about a woman named Yehudit who's very pious and who goes to basically entrap the general, the king, Holofernes is his name here, and how she goes after him, etc. A whole thing. And she goes, after she prays, a whole beautiful description of her tefillah. Not for you can read it for yourself if you're interested. But when you read that version, it's not clear what does it really have to do with Hanukkah. It's not doesn't seem to be connected directly, per se. It mentions the Hasmoneans here and there, but also mentions like Nebuchadnezzar, and the time seems to be very, very convoluted. Again, one could read this book and say, well, clearly this book is not true. Clearly it didn't really happen. Someone wrote an entertaining story for the masses, and it would be giving them hope or something like that. Lo yodea. But I'm not looking at that. I'm looking, where was this picked up by Rishonim? Where did it come into the halachic system? And that's where it has religious significance. Regardless of the story in the apocryphal version, none of these other sources quote from Maseh Yehudit from the Apocrypha per se. They quoted from these midrashim that I showed you, presumably. And then I came on something really astounding that I came across this today. In fact, the Gemara in Sanhedrin and Daf Lamed Bet tells us that there were times when there were decrees against the Jewish people. Unfortunately, it was hardly the only time. It was hardly Hanukkah. But later on in Jewish history, if you look down here with me, it describes the following. The word Tana. I'll just zoom in here. Tana, we learned. Kol Rechaim Beburne, one of the towns in Israel somewhere, if you heard the sound of the millstone going, and they would cry out, they would say, Shavua haben, Shavua haben. It's been a week that we have our son, a week that we have our son. Or Haner Bibror Chayil, if there was candles lit in Bror Chayil, they would say, Mishtesham, Mishtesham. There is a feast there, a feast there. So what is this referring to? So I don't have time to see everything inside. But if you look here, Rashi says, Shavua haben, when they would say those words, the millstone would be making noise, and then they would announce, Shavua haben, a week of the boy, a week of the boy. Simanu sheyesham brit milah, kemachriz va'omer Shavua haben, kan, v'richaim simon l'shchikat samamanin l'makar atinok. It means they were grinding the herbs they would need as balm for the child after the brit milah. And why would they say it in this coded way? Ushad gzeret hamalchut haya shagazru shalolamul v'hayu yireim lahotzi kol v'kavu siman zeh. And therefore the people were afraid to say out loud, there's a bris, because it was against the law to give your child a bris. This story is almost certainly in the Second Temple period in the Hadrianic persecutions. Not 100%, but almost certainly. But it's just interesting. Now, or haner b'bur chayil, according to the way it's written here, Rashi doesn't say like, okay, what's the light for? They were lighting candles. They would say there's a ceremony there. Mishtash, there's a feast there. Brit milah kari shavua haben al shem shu l'sof shavua. The bris was called the week of the child because it was after a full week. Now, follow with me up here to Tosfot. Tosfot explain that they explain a little more what's going on, right? But basically, they say that they couldn't make public announcements about simchas. So what did they do? They would make certain noises or certain visual signs. And it quotes here a verse in the book of Yirmiyahu. And in that verse, it mentions that times of joy included the sound of the millstone, meaning grinding, presumably for bread, and or haner, the lights that were lit for the festival or the festive meal, whatever the feast. But the point is, they represent something joyous. And everybody knew, like the secret code, when you hear that sound, you know what's going on. Look here what it describes. Or haner b'bur chayil, mikan nogul hadlik ner b'mila. From here came the tradition to light candles at a bris. Now, not been too many brises where they do this, but in the days of the Beit Tosfot, that's what they're doing. Now, when you put that together, they lit candles for a bris as a secret sign there was going to be a bris. How many days before the bris? And how many days is Chanuka? So now you go back. I'm scrolling back up to the original source that I showed you from Hirschler. I skipped a little part from the Gnuzot, from the Maaseh Beit Chashmonai. It describes that one of the ways they would get out of things is by making a siman. V'kevin sharo chachmei yisrael kach amdu v'hitkinu lahem simanim. Shekol mi shenolad lo zachar shehei madlik nerot chadashim al petach le'otah chatzer bayom hashmini. To show that the bris was about to happen, they would light extra candles at the doorway of their house on the 8th day. V'kevin she'ovrin Yisrael v'roing nerot dolkim hayim mevinim shemila l'sham. They understood that a Brit Milah was going to happen and needed to happen in that house, because outside the house, at the doorway, people were lighting candles during the time of the decree. And no one was any the wiser. They would do this in a surreptitious manner. What was the other thing they did? Whoever wanted to get married, they would bring up the millstones to the roof and start grinding the bread on the roof. So it would make a lot of noise. When people would hear that sound from the roof, they knew the kala is inside there. They would go in secretly and they would give a bracha to the chassan and the kala, and then they would leave. Does it put a little bit of a different glow on the lights of the Chanukah candles? That at the petach we're lighting the lights, at the doorway we're adding little lights, and the lights are about the 8 days. The nashim tzidkaniot, according to Maccabees, were the women who were willing to give their lives that the children should have a Brit Milah. They were going to make sure there would be a next generation that would hold fast to the Jewish tradition, and they took charge of it. That's the description. In closing tonight, it's an interesting idea. I haven't seen it practiced too much, I'll be honest, beyond just giving it a nod, but the Shulchan Aruch actually paskins that it's not a psak, but the minig. V'noagot hanashim shlo lasot malacha be'od shanerot dolkot. The women don't do malacha, they don't do work at the time when the candles are still lit. V'yesh mi she'omer she'ein lahakil lahem. Those who say that you shouldn't be lenient with them about this, i.e., they should be sure when the candles are lit, it's like a Yom Tov. It's literally like Shabbos or like a Yom Tov, like Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. Says the Magen Avraham, Hanashim, Davka Nashim, Lefisha Nasa Nes Al Yedeihem, because the miracle happened on their account. Quotes from the Mata Moshe, of Moshe Mat. You have this description here in the halachic system that maybe there's such an element of celebration for women on the holiday of Chanukah that at least while the candles are lit, for women it should be like Yom Tov. Now, some of the later poskim say, well, if they have to make dinner, they want to eat dinner, that they could do, but they shouldn't do sewing or other kinds of work, cleaning, whatever else people would be doing in the house. Davka, the men could do it, but not the women. Other poskim later on point out, well, the truth is there's a minhag that nobody should do work at all. Quoted here by the Taz. We know we're out of time, but it mentions down here that also that there's a minhag today that also the men wouldn't do malacha during the time period when the candles are lit. Also, because of the holiday and the time when the candles are burning, it's an extra element of Yom Tov that's transpiring. So what we saw tonight was the story that makes its way into the halachic system, the story, a heroic story about Yehudit, but also all these other pieces of ways in which women were instrumental in the victory of the house of Hashmonai, and the idea that perhaps one of the ideas, aside from the Nes Pach Shem, it lasted 8 days, but the analog to the 8 days and the 8 days, the lighting of lights, Davka in the doorway, was also little simon that we uphold Brit Milah in this house. And as you know and I know, we're living at a time now where you can see here and there stories in the Anglo-Jewish media, and of course in the non-Jewish media as well, terrible stories about, unfortunately, even Jews who want to give up on Brit Milah. Places in Europe where there are conversations about the humaneness, the ethical considerations of Brit Milah, etc. In some of the countries in Europe, Shechita has been outlawed right now, as we speak. This is interesting to consider that even all these years later, this remains such a focal point for us as Jews of Brit Milah and of continuing connection and covenant with Hashem, that is upheld davka a nes gadol, that is a nes nistar of Jewish women, Jewish heroic women, upholding our tradition. And I'll add as a personal note, and I'll conclude with this, that I feel so privileged to come from a line of heroic Jewish women. I'm Zoche to have my mother's Lozan Gesund and Stark. Zoche to know her mother, my Bubby, and I'm Zoche to know my father's mother. She should live and be well. Lozan Gesund and Stark. Jewish women, heroic Jewish women, who uphold Jewish tradition and to continue to light the lights. I wish everyone a Chanuka Sameach, wonderful seeing everyone online here. And God willing, next year we'll gather in person.